the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Thank you very much for talking to our viewers and sharing the stories that are part of this special commemorative edition of The Atlantic magazine, JFK, His Time and Ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta, very much.
And now we turn our attention to the House of Representatives. They are about to come in, and they will be observing a moment of silence to mark the 12th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., September 11, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Reed to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The House will now observe a moment of silence in memory of the victims of the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. Will all present please rise for a moment of silence? Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in Libya, al-Qaeda cousins, as I call them, the Ansar al-Sharia, claim responsibility for the murder of our ambassador and 3 others. It's no coincidence that these 2 attacks occurred nearly at the same time, and they both occurred on September 11th. In the past, the United States has always held and went after those that were responsible for this type of murder. In 1998, when the Kenyan embassy was attacked and Americans were killed, we responded. Of course, we responded on September the 11th. We responded after the first World Trade Center bombing. Then in 1996, when 19 American soldiers were murdered in Saudi Arabia, we responded. Mr. Speaker, the United States must always respond to terrorists, and we must let them be reminded again and again we will respond in an appropriate manner, as we did on September the 11th. We must respond today, and we must respond tomorrow. I am encouraged that the President will soon address the nation on what our response will be. We must hold those accountable personally, and hold them personally accountable because we must let people understand they need to leave us alone. That is what the message needs to be. We must have justice in these terrorist attacks by these individuals against Americans because, Mr. Speaker, justice is what we do. Mr. Speaker, that was the speech I gave on this House floor 1 year ago today. September 12th of 2012 was when it was given. But it has been 1 year since the attack in Benghazi, Libya, and we still have no answers. Today, as we remember those who were murdered 12 years ago, on September the 11th, 2001, in New York and Pennsylvania, at the Pentagon, young and old from countries all over the world, we should also remember those murdered 1 year ago in Benghazi, Libya, 4 Americans. We went after those first 9/11 killers, and we should. America had resolve, as it has usually had in our history. But the Benghazi killers run free today. Mr. Speaker, it's ironic. The greatest power that has ever existed, with all our vast resources of military, CIA intelligence, the NSA intelligence, the FBI, that we can't capture some killers who killed Americans in Benghazi, Libya, when the media can go and talk to them and have them on television and we can't even find them, capture them, and bring them back to justice? It's been a year. What does that tell the families What does it tell Americans when we haven't been able to accomplish this capture of terrorists? We know that Ansar al-Sharia was involved. I said that the day after this murder occurred last year on this House floor. So today I filed the Ansar al-Sharia Terrorist Designation Act of 2013 that says Ansar al-Sharia is a terrorist organization, and we must use all resources available to go after these killers. We must label them as terrorists and deal with them appropriately. We're not sure about United States policy today in the Middle East. We don't know what the current U.S. policy is about Americans killed overseas. All we get is a lot of words. Even the White House, the press secretary said, well, Benghazi was a long time ago. Seems like we get more words than something that is actually done in the Benghazi episode. Our enemies continue to test us because they no longer fear us, Mr. Speaker. The world no longer knows where America stands when we are attacked, either at home or abroad. Not our allies, not our enemies, and not American citizens. The President is concerned about Syrians being killed by Syria. I wish he was just as concerned about Americans being murdered by terrorists in Benghazi, Libya. The administration needs to go after these terrorists by any means necessary and bring them to justice. Restore our credibility with the American people, because justice is what we do in this country. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, President Obama, without consulting Congress or the American people, intervened in Libya's civil war, resulting in the murder of 4 Americans, including our ambassador in Benghazi, while creating yet another fertile terrorist recruiting ground. Repeating its Libya mistake, in September 2012, the Obama administration declared that America will intervene in Syria's civil war and work, quote, to support a Syrian opposition to hasten the day when Assad falls, end quote. Shortly thereafter, I stood on this floor, stated my opposition to America's intervening in yet another civil war, and argued that, quote, America must stop spending our treasury and risking American lives for those who neither appreciate our sacrifices nor believe in basic liberties like freedom of religion and freedom of speech, end quote. I have participated in classified hearings with Secretary of State John Kerry, National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and many others. I have listened to President Obama. The arguments for attacking Syria are unpersuasive. Absent substantially different circumstances and consistent with my 2012 opposition to intervening in Syria's civil war, I will vote against attacking Syria if and when Congress has that vote. I reject the President's argument that the best way to keep Syrians from killing Syrians is for Americans to kill Syrians. America has peaceful options. We should pursue them more vigorously. There is not the required public support to attack Syria. Americans oppose attacking Syria by a 2-to-1 ratio. In Alabama's 5th Congressional District, 1,272 citizens have contacted my office about Syria. 1,267 citizens oppose attacking Syria. A scant 5 citizens out of 1,272, 5 support attacking Syria. The President last night told America that there is no evidence that Syria is a security threat to America that supports preemptive military action. Yet an attack makes Syria and its allies a security threat. President Obama erred when he made Syria's chemical weapons a red line. But a president's gaffe does not justify war. A Syrian war costs money America does not have. Every dollar spent attacking Syria worsens America's deficit and debt, weakens our economy, undermines our ability to pay for national security, and increases the risk of even more defense layoffs and furloughs. An American attack on Syria aids and abets Syrian rebels. Syrian rebels have beheaded Christians solely because they are Christians. One rebel leader killed a Syrian soldier, cut open his chest, took out his heart, ate it, and then bragged about it. Another rebel leader personally executed helpless prisoners of war. I question the wisdom of helping rebels who may be even more evil and barbaric than Syrian President Assad, yet that is exactly what President Obama proposes. The White House Syrian strategy is conflicting and amorphous. The President claims he does not seek regime change, yet in 2012, his administration said the exact opposite. President Obama claims attacks will deter serious chemical weapons use, yet his Secretary of State insists that attacks will be, quote, unbelievably small, end quote. I have reservations about this administration's ability to handle a delicate foreign policy matter. This administration bungled its fast and furious gun-running program, killing hundreds of innocent Mexicans and an American Border Patrol agent. This administration botched Benghazi and threw in a cover-up for good measure. This administration illegally uses the Internal Revenue Service to attack political adversaries. The list goes on and on. President Obama has cultivated cheerleaders, but not players on the field, whose militaries will help America attack Syria. America cannot perpetually be the world's only policeman. In sum, I believe attacking Syria unilaterally makes matters worse, not better. Absent a major international effort to punish Syrian President Assad for his inhumane and criminal use of chemical weapons, I cannot and will not, in good conscience, vote on the House floor or in the Foreign Affairs or Armed Services Committees to attack Syria. Mr. Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, amidst the international humiliation and farce that we've suffered with our abortive war on Syria, there are two good things the President has done, and they need to be noted. Last night, he stepped back from an international crisis that could have had catastrophic consequences by deferring to the Russian diplomatic initiative. Thank God. And last week, he stepped back from a constitutional crisis by deferring to Congress the decision over whether to go to war, as the Constitution requires. I've been deeply troubled by suggestions from many otherwise responsible officials and commentators from both parties that the President has independent authority as Commander-in-Chief to order an attack on other countries when he deems it necessary. This cuts right to the core of our Constitution's design, and it evinces an alarming deterioration of the popular understanding of the separation of powers that keeps us free. There is nothing more clear in the American Constitution than that Congress has the sole authority to decide the question of war or peace. Only after Congress has made that decision does the President, as Commander-in-Chief, have the authority to execute that decision. For centuries, European monarchs had plunged their nations into bloody and debilitating wars on whim, and the Constitution's framers wanted to protect the American Republic from that fate. They understood that a president, for example, might someday paint himself into a rhetorical corner and feel compelled to save face by exercising force. That is precisely why they entrusted that fateful decision to the Congress. James Madison, the father of the American Constitution, said that its single most important feature was the provision that gave the Congress and not the President the authority to go to war. Here's what he wrote in 1793, quote, "In no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislature and not to the executive department. The trust and the temptation would be too great for any one man. War is, in fact, the true nurse of executive aggrandizement. In war, a physical force is to be created, and it is the executive will which is to direct it. In war, the public treasures are to be unlocked, and it's the executive hand which is to disperse them. Those who are to conduct a war cannot, in the nature of things, be proper or safe judges of whether a war ought to be commenced, continued, or concluded," end quote. In Federalist 69, Alexander Hamilton wrote that one of the most important differences between the British king and the American president is that the king can plunge his nation into war on his command, but that the American president has no such authority. The Constitutional Convention gave careful consideration to the clause that provides that Congress shall declare war. They chose that word carefully to make clear that the only independent war-making power of the president is to repel an attack. The War Powers Act makes this explicit, that absent congressional authority, the president can only order our armed forces into hostility in response to, quote, a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States, its armed forces, or its territories or possessions, unquote. Anything else requires prior congressional action. The United Nations Participation Act, by which we entered the UN, requires Congress to act before American forces are ordered into hostilities in UN actions. The War Powers Act specifically forbids inferring from any treaty the power to order American forces into hostilities without specific congressional authorization. Now, some have used the past violation of this constitutional stricture, for example, in Kosovo or most recently in Libya, as justifying it to violate it now. That is precisely the point. If any violation of this fundamental constitutional provision can be used as justification for its outright nullification, well, then any such violation must be vigorously resisted, lest we lose for all time the most important check on the most momentous decision that a government can make, to go to war. War is destruction on a massive scale. To unlawfully initiate such a thing is the highest crime that a public official could possibly commit. Indeed, if the power of impeachment were not intended for such an act as that, I cannot imagine what it would be for. The President was absolutely right not to cross that line. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize 50 years of talented work and ingenuity by a company that is headquartered in State College, Pennsylvania, in Center County, an area of central Pennsylvania that I proudly represent. AccuWeather, a content and media company that provides weather forecasting services worldwide, this year celebrates its 50th anniversary. In November of 1962, Joel Myers was serving as a one-man consulting firm, initially forecasting the weather for just one gas utility company in Pennsylvania, laid the groundwork for AccuWeather. In 1971, AccuWeather began to serve television and radio clients and later expanded to newspapers. Now home to the most professional meteorologists at any one location anywhere in the world, AccuWeather employs hundreds of individuals, many of which are graduates of nearby Penn State University, at its global headquarters in State College, Pennsylvania. Today, Mr. Myers and his team provide services to hundreds of outlets across the planet, including top-ranked newspaper publications, television networks, and thousands of other global locations. Happy 50th anniversary, AccuWeather. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Mrs. Black, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the latest jobs report released last week was a sad reminder of just how bad things have been in the Obama economy. When the President's stimulus was passed in 2009, the administration predicted that our unemployment rate would have fallen to just 5% by now. But it hasn't. It's remained stuck over 7% and would be closer to 10% if millions of Americans had not given up looking for work altogether. In fact, this latest jobs report highlighted a deeply disturbing statistic. The percentage of Americans working or looking for work has dropped to its lowest level since the middle of the Carter administration. What makes this situation even sadder for Americans across the country is that this does not have to be the case. The President could work with Congress to implement policies that would help our economy grow and help our Americans get back to work. The President could work with us to delay Obamacare, which is devastating the hiring and employment practices of companies across this country and creating a nation of part-time workers. The President could join a bipartisan consensus here in Congress and approve the Keystone Pipeline that would immediately create 20,000 jobs. The President could drop his continued insistence on tax increases and work with this Congress to pass a comprehensive, revenue-neutral tax reform package that promotes economic growth. The President has a Congress willing to work with him to help struggling Americans across this country. Whether he chooses to work with us is his decision. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Benishek, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor today to honor the life of Michigan State Police Trooper Paul Butterfield, who was tragically killed in the line of duty on September 9th, 2013. Trooper Butterfield was an Army veteran who bravely served his community as a state police officer since 1999. He served at the Michigan State Police Post in Manistee and in Hart. Like all of our law enforcement officers, Paul risked everything to ensure our communities and neighborhoods were safe. He gave his life to protect us. His service and sacrifice will never be forgotten. Sadly, Northern Michigan has lost a true hero. To Trooper Butterfield's family, I am aware no words will ever match your deep sorrow. A loss this great can only be eased by the grace that is beyond all worldly powers. But I am hopeful that you will be embraced by the angels of heaven and comforted by the knowledge that Paul is safely in the hands of God. On behalf of the citizens of Michigan's 1st District, I thank Trooper Butterfield for his service and tremendous sacrifice to Michigan and our nation. Thank you. Let me yield to my friend and colleague, Mr. Huizenga.
Thank you, Dr. Benishek. And as was said, Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, Michigan lost a true hero. Trooper Paul Butterfield died from a gunshot wound that he sustained while conducting a quote-unquote routine traffic stop in Mason County on September 9th. This senseless act of violence will no doubt shake communities throughout northwest Michigan as we wonder why this heartbreaking event ever took place and how it happened in Mason County and how we make sure it never happens again. Trooper Butterfield's response to the situation has been described by the Michigan State Police as, quote, perfect, and that he, quote, did everything right. This tragic loss of life serves as an ever-present reminder that there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop for police officers. And on this special day, September 11, we want to thank all of our first responders for the work that they do. We must never forget or take for granted the work that the men and women who put their lives on the line for us every day as they protect our kids, our communities, and our countries. Paul, you will not be forgotten by me, the people of the 2nd District, or throughout Michigan. Again, my heart goes out to Trooper Butterfield's family, his fiancée, his friends, his colleagues from the State Police Post in Hart, as well as the State Police Post in Manistee. Natalie and my family will keep you all in our prayers during this time of extraordinary need. And we just want to say to you, Paul, rest well, our friend. Rest well. I yield back to my colleague, Dr. Benishek.
I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
Chair recognizes the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Frelinghuysen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to mark the 12th anniversary of the attack on America of September 11, 2001. In lieu of formal remarks, I would like to read the names, a poem written by then Poet Laureate Billy Collins, which was read before a joint session of Congress in Lower Manhattan just after the attacks. The names by Billy Collins. Yesterday I lay awake in the palm of the night. A soft rain stole in unhelped by any breeze. And when I saw the silver glaze on the windows, I started with A, with Ackerman, as it happened. then Baxter and Calabro, Davis and Eberling, names falling into place as droplets fell through the dark. Names printed on the ceiling of the night. Names slipping around a watery bend. 26 willows on the banks of a stream. In the morning I walked out barefoot among thousands of flowers, heavy with dew like the eyes of tears. Each had a name, Fiore inscribed on a yellow petal, then Gonzalez and Hahn, Ishikawa and Jenkins, names written in the air and stitched into the cloth of the day, a name under a photograph taped to a mailbox, monogram on a torn shirt. I see you spelled out on storefront windows and on the bright unfurled awnings of this city. I say the syllables as I turn a corner: Kelly and Lee, Medina, Nardella, and O'Connor. When I peer into the woods, I see a thick tangle where letters are hidden, as in a puzzle concocted for children. Parker and Quigley in the twigs of an ash. Rizzo, Schubert, Torres, and Upton, secrets in the boughs of an ancient maple. Names written in the pale sky, names rising in the updraft amid buildings, names silent in stone or cried out behind a door, names blown over the earth and out to sea. In the evening, weakening light, the last swallows, a boy on a lake lift his oars. A woman by a window puts a match to a candle, and the names outlined on the rose clouds, Wanacore and Wallace. Let X stand, if it can, for the ones unfound. Then Young and Zeminski, the final jolt of Z, names etched on the head of a pin. One name spanning a bridge, another undergoing a tunnel, a blue name needled into the skin. Names of citizens, workers, mothers and fathers, the bright-eyed daughter, the quick son. The alphabet of names in a green field, names in the small tracks of birds, names lifted from a hat or balanced on the tip of the tongue, names wheeled into the dim warehouse of memory. So many names, there is barely room on the walls of the heart. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today on September 11th, I want to take a moment to reflect on that fateful event on the day of 2001 at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, the fields of Pennsylvania, and again in Benghazi in 2012. And ask that we always remember the resilience and strength of the greatest nation on earth. Mr. Speaker, there are moments in time when we cease to be Republicans and Democrats. Politics and punditry melt away. Divisions close and differences fade. We come together as Americans regardless of race, creed, or religion. September 11th of 2001 and again in 2012 was and will always be such occasions. On those days, our nation came together. That is what makes our nation great and unique. Not only do we come together to celebrate and triumph, but we stand together in tragedy. It is in the face of adversity when our resilience is truly tested, and as Americans, time and time again, throughout history, we have passed that test. Throughout the course of those days, heroes ran into buildings and stormed a cockpit, went into burning embassies. They lent blood when it was needed and donated clothes off their back. That, Mr. Speaker, is the true America. Not partisan gridlock, not tension-building punditry, not games of gotcha or smoke and mirrors legislation. The rallying cry of that day was simple in phrase, but monumental in meaning. USA. Country was first, everything else was second. As we tackle the monumental challenges that lie ahead, I ask my colleagues to remember the spirit of that day. to do what is right for America, not for one party over another. The heroes of that day did what they did, not because of any political party, but because it was simply the right thing to do. It was the American thing to do. Americans, regardless of who they voted for, feel the consequences of our decisions each and every day. Today of all day, let us all remember to put our country first and act as true representatives for the will of all the people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
And legislative work starts at noon Eastern with one bill on the calendar. The measure offered by Tennessee Republican Diane Black would bar subsidies and benefits from the health care law until the Health and Human Services Department can implement a plan to check household income and insurance status. The White House has issued a veto threat on the bill as written. We'll have live coverage of the House when they return at noon Eastern here on C-SPAN. And today marks the 12th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attack.